Hey y'all, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. We're going to continue our discussion on insulin resistance today. I don't have Stormy with me. She's feeling better and a lot more energetic, so she's playing right now. Before, when she wasn't feeling as good, she would definitely stay still a lot better. Now there's a lot more movement, a lot more kitten behavior, so maybe I can catch her playing or something and add that to this video. But like I said, we'll continue talking about insulin resistance. We're going to start moving into some of the different things that could cause insulin resistance. So today we're going to talk primarily about like age and genetics. So two things we really don't have any control over, but they do play a part in things. Luckily, they're not playing the biggest role in things. So that's the good news, is that the things that play a much bigger role, we actually have some control over. These things do play a role. It's a small role, but unfortunately we can't really do anything about them. So when it comes to genetics, there was one study looking at teenagers, and if the teenagers had at least one parent who was insulin resistant, their fasting insulin levels were 20% higher than normal, or than other teenagers who didn't have at least one parent. And so now the number I kind of like for fasting insulin is for it to be under like 5 or under. So a 20% increase would be like 4 going up to 5. So it doesn't necessarily mean their insulin levels were high. You'd have to break down the study and look. I'm sure there were some that were, some that weren't, but it was still higher most of the time than the kids that didn't have that parent with that already predisposition there. The other thing too, all out genetic mutations causing insulin resistance is extremely rare. It's only maybe 5% of cases, people with diabetes and different things. So most commonly, it's more of a more normal genetic pattern going that most of us have. And that explains most people that have diabetes and insulin resistance. Again, only 5% of people with it have a true genetic link, and that's the sole cause, or the main cause, I guess I should say. So much more likely that someone's going to have kind of this hodgepodge, so they're not truly at risk based just on genetics or at this high risk. They're just kind of at this normal risk. But then when you add in the lifestyle factors, that's what tips them over into insulin resistance. And so we've talked before about genetics and epigenetics, and this is the same as it is with most disease processes. It's very common based on your genetics where you might have the susceptibility to something, or this increased risk, slightly for it. But if you don't have those lifestyle factors, those exposures, different things along those lines, then those genes never get turned on to express that disease process. So the same thing here. Now, if you have that genetic mutation that makes you more susceptible for something, and then you combine that with the exposures and with the poor lifestyle choices and different things, that's not a good combination. That can almost guarantee you'll end up with that disease process going. So I would say for the people that their insulin resistance is primarily due to a genetic disorder, I would still work on the lifestyle factors, because I think that's going to have other benefits for your health, not just the insulin resistance side, but they may also need some medications or something else to kind of help deal with things and get them in a better place. For the other people, if they're dealing with this, if they just work on the lifestyle factors and don't limit the exposures, things like that, that will probably take care of what they need, and there may not need to be any medications involved. It's an individual basis, so there's no way to say that's I can guarantee that for everybody, but I would say there's a good chance. How about that? So another thing they looked at, they've looked at ethnicity. And so they looked at kind of the primary ethnicities you see in the US. And so they looked at Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Caucasians. And what they found is the level, like the ones that are higher or more likely to be insulin resistant, were in that order. So Hispanic Americans have the worst insulin sensitivity, Asian Americans second worst, African Americans third worst, and Caucasians are last on that. So it's kind of interesting to see that. The more interesting thing, a lot of times you can use like waist to hip ratio, BMI, different things like that, and there's a fairly good correlation between higher values there leading to increased insulin resistance. And so there's a good correlation. Again, correlation does not equal causation, but you tend to see both, except for with Asian Americans. They actually had some of the lowest BMIs, lowest waist to hip ratios, yet they were second highest on insulin resistance. So there's some other factors that go into things too. We'll get to that another time, but it's just kind of an interesting finding. Another thing they looked at or another group they looked at were the Pima Indians, and they were actually found to have the worst insulin resistance. And so this kind of makes me think of Weston A. Price. He was a dentist, and I think in the 30s or so, he went to different places around the world looking at people's teeth and different things along those lines. And what he found a lot of times is, with these people that were kind of isolated or had been isolated for years, but now because of different shipping and transport and things were being exposed to more Western foods, your processed foods and things, he saw differences occurring. And so some of the things he would see is like, their jaws were more narrow, which then meant their teeth were coming in crooked because there wasn't that same space. Some of this could be due to when babies are born and what they're eating. If it's kind of harder and they're having to chew, it kind of builds those muscles and it helps kind of widen the jaw a little bit, which again gives space for the teeth to come in alignment rather than angles and being crunched together. He would also see like no cavities when they were eating their standard traditional diet, but they would have cavities once they started eating the processed foods and the Western foods. And he would see some of these changes in like the facial structure within that first generation. So let's say, mom and dad had a child in their normal tribe. That child grew up at whatever age, 20 or so, went to the city to live and then had kids. You would see those changes in their kids. So it didn't take very long for some of this to occur. And what he also noticed is you tended to see more health issues for the people that weren't following their normal traditional diet. They were doing that more Western diet. You didn't see those same issues in the people who stayed and ate their traditional diet. And that was kind of seen in a lot of different places, Australia, Eskimos and things too. So he's got a book that's really good that you can read, and it talks about some of those things. So again, I think what we're seeing is that maybe people were kind of meant to eat a certain way. Like if you were this ethnicity, this type of diet plan tends to work well for you. When you move into something else, it might not work so well. And I think that goes to show, again, there's not like this one perfect diet that's going to work for every single person because we're all different. There's probably some big general principles we can apply, but how we apply it's going to vary a lot. And that's fine. That's actually a good thing. That way we have some leeway, we have some room for things, and we can enjoy stuff and not be so strict and so precise and robotic. That's not fun. So I prefer having some of that leeway and being able to play with things some. All right, let's move on. So age again, hopefully we're going to age. That's kind of the natural process of things. And so as we get older, we do tend to see more insulin resistance. Some of this could be related to hormones. So we see hormone changes as we age. We also see loss of muscle mass when we age, so sarcopenia. And we've talked plenty of times before how muscle mass is related to longevity. And if we have muscle mass, we have places to store things too. So I think that's why we see some of that insulin resistance. We're losing out on some of that storage side. With menopause. So as women move into menopause, their estrogen levels drop. Well, estrogen kind of helps to keep insulin sensitivity high. So if estrogen goes down, that means insulin resistance goes up. That's not what we want. The good news with this, if women do take hormone therapy, it can help alleviate this. So that can help to keep that insulin sensitivity where it is. There's other research that talks about how it's beneficial for women to start taking hormone therapy fairly soon after they are in kind of perimenopause, menopause, that transition time, and then into menopause. And that helps with their cognitive ability and different things too, bone mass. So there are benefits to it. Some of the studies that showed the negatives with estrogen therapy, they weren't very good studies. So they're does not seem to be that risk of breast cancer that people were so afraid of. I'm not saying there's no risk whatsoever. I think with every medication, there's a risk. And with hormones, they're very powerful. So we have to be real careful with those. But I do think they can be very beneficial. We see something similar in men. As men get older, it's natural for their testosterone levels to drop. And if their testosterone levels drop, then insulin resistance tends to go up. So that same kind of inverse relationship. Again, testosterone replacement therapy can help to alleviate this. Now, we know that's not the only thing, because we do see more men now that are not that old but have low testosterone levels. So there's something else going on there. Again, probably more lifestyle factors and different things that are playing a role in that. And so this is why I think trying to cover those lifestyle factors will play a big part for everyone. I think what it will do, can I guarantee it's going to mean there will be no medication needed, no supplements or anything extra? No, that's a case by case basis, and that's where the nuance comes in, and it depends. It depends on the person, depends on how long it's been going on, depends on what they're doing, depends on their family history. It depends on a lot of things. You get the point. But if we have those lifestyle factors in place, we've got those foundations of health in place, then we're setting our body up to be able to do what it needs to do and what it would naturally do. And so then that's going to mean if we do need medicine or supplements or anything else, we're going to need less of them to get the same benefit. If we're trying to keep doing the same thing that's making the matters worse and worse and worse and worse, well, if we are having to take medications to try to help that, to try to fix some of those issues, then we're just going to keep taking a higher dose and higher dose because we're not addressing the underlying cause that keeps making it go up. So that's where the lifestyle factors can come in. And again, that's sometimes where we need that combination of both. And that's sometimes how you get the best results for things. But again, it depends. It's on a case by case basis. It depends on you, depends on what you want to do, what you're willing to do, and what your body needs. And that's something you have to kind of tease out little by little. But I would start kind of low and slow and slowly build up, especially when we're talking about medications and things like hormones. I think they can be very helpful, but again, they're very powerful. So I would want to start low and slowly build up and see how you respond. I think that's just the best way. So we got to remember too that insulin is a hormone. It interacts and communicates with a bunch of other different hormones. And that's what we'll talk about more next week. We'll get into more of the hormone systems and how they're related to each other, how insulin impacts them. So that's what we'll talk about next week. I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's any topics you want me to discuss too. Like I said, I definitely want to try to get through all this with insulin because I do think it plays a big role in things. I think it ties into diet, which is a big issue. And then we can move on to other topics, but I think this will lay a good foundation for moving into other things like thyroid and different systems after this. But again, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. Like, subscribe, do all the good stuff. See you next time. Bye-bye.